Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Opinion Machine, the show where we talk about all things gaming. My name is Killjoy, and today I want to talk about something that I've been wanting to talk about for a little while now, which is bad video game launches and post-game patching. So what am I specifically trying to get at here? Well, over the last few years, we've seen this more commonplace. We've seen a lot of live service games do this. We've seen things like this with Cyberpunk, where video games get released in a awful state, whether that be through just a no content or a buggy state. Usually the two biggest offenders. Live service games, you see this a lot. Sea of Thieves on launch, kind of a nice cool game, not much to do there. Fallout 76 on launch was broken. They may have fixed it now. You had Cyberpunk on launch, which wasn't a live service game, and that was just broken. And so I am of the opinion that a video game gets one launch. Now that, in this post-patching era, doesn't actually ring true as much, but if a video game company is unwilling to put the time and effort in before releasing the product, what makes them have the right for my time to come back and look at it later? Warcraft 3 Reforged is another good example of this. You know, how Blizzard messed that game up so badly, I do not know, but that's a game that I will never go back to. Commandos 2 HD Remastered was a terrible remaster as well. I tried it on launch. After an hour, I had it refunded. So, but this brings in the double-edged sword of post-game patching, or patching video games in general. Patching inherently isn't a bad thing, because what patching allows a company to do is go back and make tweaks and fixes, balance patches, potentially add new content to the game, put in free stuff. There's obviously that. The other side of that, which makes it the double edge, is that this idea of, oh, we can release the game in a not so great state and we can fix it later. And that is my biggest hate with how we are in this place at the moment with the gaming industry, and have been for a little while. And this isn't to say that this is every single game that comes out, because it isn't. There are good examples of games that have had patches and sustainability and done it in the right way, versus things like Cyberpunk and Fallout 76 and Anthem and, you know, any kind of games like that, where Sea of Thieves as well, where they've come out and either had very little content or lackluster content to being a buggy, crappy game on launch. And I get it that, you know, video games have a time frame of which they must be developed and then put out to store shelves so that people can buy them. But when you have a product that clearly isn't either in a state to be released or clearly has no content, releasing it and then saying, hey, you know, we've got more stuff coming, you know, whether that be free patches or, you know, paid content or free content, you've already set yourself up to say, this is how we care about our game. We're not giving you the best product at launch, but we're giving you a product, you know. And yeah, you could revisit that game in 2 years' time and it could be amazing and have all this extra content and tons to do. But you shouldn't give the game a pass just because it's gotten better. Final Fantasy XIV, while I've not played it, I know launched in a state that nobody liked. They went back, did this massive overhaul, and people like it now. Should you give them a pass on it? Should you trust these guys to, you know, not make the same mistake next time or do something like this again? No, you shouldn't, because if they can't be bothered to put the game out in a state like that in the first place, you should be very cautious for everything they do going forward. Now, I still haven't played Cyberpunk, which I do want to play at some point, but I'm still waiting till I hear about the game being in a much better state. And even at this point now, the game seems to be still quite buggy. It's probably significantly better than it was, and it's probably much more playable now. But, you know, I understand the fact that that game was clearly released too early. They tried to take on too much. There was a lot of mismanagement with that game. And the same goes for any of these games that use this whole post-launch patching to fix things like that, like significant fixes. I'm not talking like minor bugs here, because every game's going to have minor bugs, you know, probably because some things fall through the cracks. So yeah, that's not a problem, you know. Oh, they've released a good game. Alright, this is a really good game. It's a couple of minor bugs. oh look, 2 weeks later they've put out a patch that's fixed most of the small things, and then they continue to do like little tweaks and stuff. That's fine. Like, that's an okay thing to have going on, because it means that the actual game itself is in a good state. It doesn't have game-breaking bugs. It's not got things that are ruining the player enjoyment. And that's why it's so frustrating that we live in a time that we see this more and more often, where video games are getting released in awful states and having to be fixed later on. And you also see day one patches. Now that raises a whole nother question, because the whole point of a day one patch, you're just like, well, why isn't this in the game? Well, excuse me, that's because they've got to work on, the game goes gold into the state that they consider playable and releasable, and then they carry on working on stuff. So, you know, when you buy the game and you install it, they're like, oh, here's an extra couple of gigs or whatever of a patch to make the game up to the current version they're working on, because the version you've just installed is like 3 weeks out of date or a month out of date or something. So I know it's frustrating, but at least if it's fixing things and adding things in or whatever, that's good. What about games that actually do the post-launch patch stuff well? Well, Splatoon 1, the Splatoon series, is a great example of this, where the game came out, and then basically they were releasing a new gun or items of clothing and stuff every week. There was constant free updates, all the maps were free, all the weapons were free. As there wasn't, I don't think in Splatoon 1 there was any extra paid content. Everything that got added was free, and it was a great way to keep the player base enthralled into the game. It was a multiplayer game. It's like, oh, everybody gets a new map, everybody can get, you know, add these guns on, add these new clothing items on. There was stuff locked behind Amiibo, which was again another whole different story, and that was shady. But the actual game itself, if you ignore and take that one bit away, you had a game here that Nintendo of all companies released and did a really good job of it. At the same time, looking at CD Projekt Red again, The Witcher 3 came out, and they added so much free content. There was paid DLC in those games, but there were 2 big expansion packs that were added later down the line. There was a ton of free DLC given away, constant updates. Like, again, the game didn't release in the best state at launch. I don't know how bad it was compared to Cyberpunk, but all I remember, because I have still not played it, I remember at the time they were constantly giving out free stuff. We see smaller indie devs do this. We see games like a lot of action RPGs, Torchlight and Grim Dawn and things like that, where they constantly update the game afterwards. Lots of free post-patching. And this is a good example of how to do it right, where you're the game is just getting better through removing bugs, from adding in that content. It keeps the player base happy. It's totally fine to make paid content, paid DLC. Like, Grim Dawn is a good example of this, because it's a game that I've played and I really enjoy, where you don't have to buy the DLC. They add on these big new areas to explore, but you don't have to buy it. A lot of the content that's in the game has been added over time. New weapons and tweaks to things and all that kind of stuff, because most of the time these developers understand that, you know, if you want to keep your player base interested, you have to keep the game updated, and giving away smaller content, like little content patches like that, are totally fine. Obviously, if you make an entire new, like, part to the game, sure, charge it, that's fine, like, make money off of that. But there are so many good examples of games that have done this right. You know, we've seen it with Mario Tennis Aces. Like, this is why it always surprises me when Nintendo does it. We've seen it with Mario Tennis Aces, because for a year, I think they were adding characters in for free. There are no paid DLC characters. There's no paid DLC content. They added in, I think, extra content overall. I can't remember what that content was, but it was like, I think, extra game modes or something. But then they added in like 10 characters for free, or something ridiculous like that. And it's weird when you see games do this, because it's not the precedent. You know, we don't see that often. Usually, you know, we see with fighting games, they're a classic example of new characters get added, they're always DLC, they always cost. You know, you might get lucky, you might get 1 or 2 free characters. And it's interesting to see when games do this. And they are fantastic examples of how you should keep the game going. Like, there's this wonderful line there that's drawn where it's like, hey, I've put out a product and that has an initial price, and now I'm going to keep working on the game, I'm going to improve the game, listen to feedback, and then add in stuff that you think is suitable. You think, oh, you know what, yeah, that should be in the game, well, that should be changed. And that's a great way of having these post-patching and this that were doing all this extra content. Obviously, like I said, big huge updates. I get it. You should probably charge people for like massive expansions, but it shows the difference between that and when a game launches badly. When a game launches badly and you're spending all that time patching to fix things, then it's just like, well, why wasn't this product in that state before it released? When a game comes out and it's just in a really bad playable state, and I know this is a hard thing with PCs because most people have different hardware, so you're trying technically to get the game running on high end, middle end, low end. So you are going to encounter more problems with PC when that happens. Less so on console. That's why when a game comes out and it's on console and it runs terribly and it's buggy, it's worse because you're sticking to one set of hardware that everybody has the same hardware for. So if one person's got these issues, everybody's probably got these issues, most likely. And yeah, it's a really shitty practice that seems to be more and more common in today's age. It's not often you will buy a game and that is the finished product. Developers like to add on content, paid or unpaid. They like to make their games last longer, and that's fine. Like, that's totally fine, but there is a right way to go about that, and there is a wrong way to go about that. The wrong way is Cyberpunk, Fallout 76, Anthem, Sea of Thieves. Despite Sea of Thieves being a polished product, there was no content there at launch. So that's what makes that one stand out to me. Whereas Anthem, again, no content. It might have been buggy, can't remember. Fallout 76 was definitely broken on launch, as was Cyberpunk. And it goes to show that if you're going to make these games, you've got to launch in a state to have that. You want good press around your game. You want people to enjoy the product. Cyberpunk, I have a feeling, is eventually just going to get abandoned, and they're going to move on to whatever the next product is. And it goes to show that you just can't. No matter how big, how big the IP is, how much like going into it is. If your product sucks, it sucks. And they've spent most of their time now at this point just patching it to fix it. And again, it's just not how it should be done. Now, you can obviously disagree with me on this because some people are going to sit there and say, oh, video games, their lives have been extended, in which case they have for the most part. I don't think that's always a good thing. It kind of depends on a game-by-game basis. I don't want to buy a single-player game, let's say a Metroidvania of some kind, whether that be, I don't know, like, let's take Metroid Dread, for example. Metroid Dread is coming out this year. If the game is 10 to 15 hours, and I feel like I got my money out of it, that's great. I don't need them to go back and start adding in all this extra content. It's not a game that's designed like that. That's a game that is handcrafted to be a type of adventure with secrets and exploration and stuff, and that should all be there from the start. Now, if I was making a roguelike and I put out a fairly good product, then I could be like, oh, I'm going to add in some maybe bonus rooms. I'm going to add in some extra content there, like maybe more weapon types or something like that. That works in that context because that's a game that you can add on to. There's a lot of replayability there, and I think it comes down to game by game. We see this with fighting games are a great example of all this, where they want to add in, they will add in stuff for free. They will do balance patches, tweaks, all that kind of stuff, and then sell more characters and things. We see this all the time. And so we are living in a time now where more games want our attention. More games demand our attention because they're constantly having updates. So they're in our brain. So back in the day, you'd play a game, it'd be like, back on the SNES or the Mega Drive, and you'd have a game and have like 10 levels in it, you complete it, and that was it, You might move on to something else. Now, with platformers anyway, you could add in more content quite easily, keep people more interested, and, obviously for people that enjoy that game, that's great. But it's an interesting way that we've gone and have been going for a while, and this is a topic that I think I could have a debate with a lot of people on about, like, especially video game launches. I truly believe that if your launch sucks, then like you're not going to have that, you're not going to gain people back in 2 years' time when it's fixed. Now, there are examples of like that, like I said, Final Fantasy. But I think they're very few and far between. I can't imagine Anthem ever got, I know they've abandoned it, I can't imagine Anthem ever really got the player base back after the first week. Sea of Thieves might have, Fallout 76 might have, but as far as I'm concerned, if you mess up your launch of your video game, then like that is a problem with you, and you don't deserve to have the players invested their time. Like, don't waste somebody's time. Put out a good product, people will play it, they'll love it, they'll talk about it. Put out a crap product and you spend the rest of the time trying to fix it, then you don't deserve the time of these players. Simple as that. Even if there is a good game there, if the game crashes every 5 minutes, or like you get stuck in the world and stuff, yeah, you know what, you don't deserve my time. You don't deserve anyone's time, as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic. I think people are going to agree and disagree with me on this, but I do think that there is the right way and the wrong way to go about post-patching and how to launch games and things like that. Now, I'm obviously not a game developer, so I know things do go wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, if I'm excited about a game, or I'm really interested in the game and it launches and it doesn't work, or it just ends up being lackluster as all hell, you can fix that game many years down the line, and I'm probably still not going to come back and play it. Like, you had your chance. So, that's my thoughts on like video game launches and post-patching, and how I think it can be used well. But overall, I think you just got to be very careful with how these companies deal with it, and what state their game is, and where they kind of go from it there with post-patching. Anyway, that's going to do it for me today then. Thank you very much for watching as always. If you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more content, then hit subscribe. And links for Facebook and Twitter will be down below as always. And until next video, I will see you then.